Good morning, folks. Coming at you today from Hacienda Rosa up in the mountains and foothills of El Yunque in Luquillo, Puerto Rico. This is one of the properties I manage, and I'm up here today to kind of finish up a couple of our jobs that we started yesterday. So you're going to see a lot of clips from yesterday afternoon while we were doing this work, and this vlog will probably come out in the afternoon, not the morning as usual, because I'm going to be up here working. So just a little heads up before we get started, but we're going to basically talk today about how we're using the grass that's growing on site, the abundant grass that's growing on site, as you'll soon see, to help with the fertility of our gardens and our future gardens. So yeah, let's get started. So you can see this slope here is just covered in grass. And right now we're at the perfect time because this grass is fully bladed, which means the blades are completely intact all the way up, kind of like this here, right? I had cut this down pretty much to bare. It looked more or less like this. So here's the work that we were doing yesterday. This is kind of what it looked like about maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago up here. And look at the abundant growth that pops right back. So this slope here is a pretty steep slope, so we're not trying to do major work on it, but there's currently a lot of grass growing that otherwise would be overgrown. And when this kind of grass, especially in the tropics, isn't cut back and it's just kind of allowed to grow and fall over, it creates this thatch layer where essentially water and nutrient won't actually penetrate down to the soil because the thatch layer keeps it. So what happens is that thatch layer, it's just this pile on pile and layer of grass, and a lot of it's dry and dying or completely dead already, but it's not actually making contact with the ground. So instead of decomposing quickly like it would if it were touching the ground, it actually just sits there and just becomes dry and just lays there. And then what happens is the grass kind of stops growing as much because it has no reason to grow. It just kind of died back and is there, right? So what we're doing here by cutting this grass is we're actually pumping this whole system with hormones within the soil, because basically when you cut a large area like this, especially of grass, what happens is the soil life, the life that's down in the soil, it's going to recognize that these plants right now, they're in abundant growth phase, they're in that kind of new growth phase, right? So when we cut it back down before it gets to its seeding or flowering stage, it's going to trigger to the plant, oh, it's time for me to start producing new growth again. And the same thing happens with all this grass as the majority of the species here. When we cut that back, the soil life and the hormones produced by the plant encourage new life growth, and it encourages that kind of nutrient cycling that the plants need for that. So we're actually using the cutting of this grass to both cycle the nutrients within this slope to get our kind of Filipino coconut trees here that we planted just after Hurricane Maria about 3 years ago. We get those things pumping with a little bit of extra nutrient pump because we're cutting that grass. We use that grass as mulch around those coconut trees so that the grass doesn't take over around them and steal all the nutrient. And then we also harvest this grass and take it and use it in our chicken systems and in the beginning of our forest systems here. So this grass ends up being mulch. It also becomes compost. We use this in our compost as well. It's very similar to my homestead down there, but on a much, sorry about that, just dropped you. It's very similar to the homestead size or backyard homestead size, what I'm doing down at my place, because I also harvest grass and use it for compost and use it for mulch and everything, but I have a much smaller property to deal with. Here, this place is huge. This is a 6-acre homestead, and the majority of it's forest. So there's a lot of growth here that we don't need to control all of, because luckily a lot of it's in forest, and we're just leaving it in forest to grow, because in the end the forest is just going to take care of itself. We don't have to put much input there. However, on these slopes where we do want to make sure that we're a little bit more in control, right up the hill here is a guest house that they also rent out, obviously not during these times of Corona, but when they are renting that out, that's a guest house, and it has a perfect view of El Yunque. Now it's really clouded this morning because we're getting a lot of rain. It might actually start raining on us while I'm filming, so we'll just kind of see how far I get today. But right up there, that's El Yunque. You can't even see the peaks. So that's up there's a cloud forest up in this rainforest, and right up there you can kind of see where it starts. Pretty much that layer right there that's the cloud forest area. So if you actually hiked up to the top there, that's a whole different type of forest, and it's really, really cool. But anyway, the guest house up there has a view of that mountain, and that's a view that we want to keep. So when we're thinking about permaculture design, we're also thinking about what the view is. The view is like a resource that you can use. You can block that resource, or you can allow that resource to go. So we want to keep that resource of that beautiful view of the mountain. So whatever we do on this slope here, we don't want it to be blocking that view. So we don't want anything growing that's really, really, really tall. These Filipino coconuts get 20, 30 feet usually. It might hit just the top of that slope there, but they'll still be able to see over it, so we're kind of okay with that. But anything that gets maybe 40, 50 feet tall, we don't want to plant on this slope because we want to make sure we keep that view. So it's really about working with the clients you're working. If you're doing permaculture design, it's about working with the client's desires and their goals, and also your own goals. If you were living in that house, would you want the view, or would you want a big old tree blocking you, you know? So this slope here, we basically cycle this grass, and a lot of times we'll just leave it right in the ground if that's that kind of time of year where it needs a lot of help. We never want to leave bare soil. So when we do this major cutting like we did here yesterday, you can see we're always leaving enough to cover the soil here, because we don't want to be, you know, doing anything negative to our soil, even though this soil probably isn't the best soil, and honestly this is kind of a truck drive that we're trying to reestablish. So this won't even be really a growing space at all, with the exception of maybe just the edge here to make sure we keep the stability of this slope. So this whole slope is not really meant for growing, but we still want to make sure that we're not going to have any erosion. So we make sure that we always have the soil covered. Soil's always covered. We always, when we're harvesting this, we'll harvest all the grass that's like growing all through here, and then as we cut down below here with all this kind of taller grass, instead of cutting it all the way down to the ground or close to the ground like we do over here, we actually just harvest the top of it on this edge here and put it back onto the soil here. So we're taking the nutrient that would have otherwise been kind of fallen downhill and placing it right back on top to keep that nutrient uphill. So that's a really good strategy. If you're ever going to be cutting and you're working on systems, move your nutrient uphill so you're not losing it as it goes down the hill. That's a good rule of thumb. Is if you can follow that rule of thumb in general, if you can harvest from the bottom of your property and move it back to the top of your property, if you have a slope, that's going to prevent that nutrient from running all the way down. And it also tends to be towards the bottom of your hill slopes and everything. That tends to be where fertility collects, because all that nutrient washes down slope just naturally with the flow of water over time, right? So usually the bottom slopes the bottom parts of your slope on your property will probably be your most fertile slopes, and you'll probably notice that, and that's why a lot of agricultural land is pretty much in the valleys right before it gets to the river. Lots of nutrient runoff down slope, and then it all starts collecting on that nice little flat area near the river, and that's where that really fertile soil is, and that's why agriculture uses that soil a lot. So down here, the future of this area is likely going to be a main crop. So you can see right there, this is the sugar shack. This is one of their rental properties. And this is, again, not in the times of Corona, but typically this is rented every single night. So this is a source of income that allows them to support the development of the infrastructure here on site to be more, self-sufficient and permanent. But this slope down here, this is a west-facing slope. That's pretty much due west, straight over that way. So this west-facing slope is actually pretty hot. And while we do have a lot of rain here in the tropics, when we don't have rain, like the past couple of days, it actually gets really, really dry. Now, obviously, we had a lot of rain last night, and we have rain today. So it's starting to get wet. And if we have even another day of rain, it's going to get super wet down here. That's just what happens. That's how the structure of this property is and how the property flows work. So, but down here, this will probably do a main crop because we have a lot of sun, abundant sun. We can do gravity irrigation from the top of the property down here, so we can actually catch the rainwater from the top of the property and just use that as a free resource down here to actually irrigate crops. And because we have truck access, we'll actually be able to back a truck down or drive a truck down here and pick up any harvest from, you know, this little flat area. Or Rio and I yesterday were actually hanging out in here when we got a little hot in the sun. There's a nice little flat area right in the forest here, so we're thinking maybe we build a little kind of harvest deck and prep deck up here, and then we can just back the truck down this slope and then just back it up right here, and we can just walk. There's a little bit of a step up here you can't really see because of all the growth, but then we can just back it up here after we've done the washing and everything, put it on the truck, and it can go up to either the market or to the refrigerator so that we can use it and sell it for later. So that's a little bit about this. You can see we have lots of banana growth here. This is amazing property. It already had so much food production on it before I even got here, because these guys are really smart and actually started thinking about that a while back, and their grandfather was into growing food. So there's been food production on this property pretty much as long as I can remember. When I was a kid, I actually came and stayed on this property every year for about 5 or 6 years after we moved away from here. I did live in Puerto Rico as a kid for 4 years, so that was 1st through 4th grade, and then I came back, I think, from 5th through 9th or 10th grade every single summer, and I stayed on this property. So this property is really kind of near and dear to my heart, and I'm really excited to be here working on it again and doing it more, you know, part-time, full-time, helping with the design of the property and then the implementation of all the things that we're doing here. But on this slope here, we kind of call it the banana slope, and this is kind of the sugar shack field back here, and this will probably be where we do that main crop like I was talking about. But all those bananas right there, we just cleaned them up. You can kind of see them much better now because Rio got in there yesterday to really clean up, and they actually just planted an avocado on that slope too, just to see if it'll do well. So we're just experimenting. We get to see what works, what doesn't. This is one of those kind of permaculture mindsets of small, slow solutions. Instead of implementing everything at once, try a couple things first, and then if it fails and if it doesn't work, then you know. But if it is a great success and you've never seen anything better, then you know to do more of that. So it's just about try things, little things, one thing at a time. Don't overstress yourself with these kind of projects, because it's really easy to invest a lot of time and money into getting a system installed, but if you don't have the time to maintain it, it's likely just going to end up being destroyed because it needs help along the first stages of production. So yeah, what we did here yesterday is all this area looked exactly like up on this slope here, really tall grass growing. So what we did is essentially came through with our machetes and the little hand sickle that I've been pointing with this whole time. This is one of my favorite tools, and I just let Rio use it yesterday, and he kind of fell in love with it as well. Great for harvesting grass like this, long grass. You can basically just grab it and cut it, and it's really easy to keep holding a bundle of it as you continue to cut, and then that can just be thrown down on the ground and then picked up later when you're done with all of your grass cutting. So we're actually going to be doing more grass cutting today, I believe, so I'll continue the practice and continue honing that skill. But what we did yesterday is cut all this down here, and then we raked it all up and we harvested it, and then we took it down and we used it to add mulch to our chicken system, our little mobile chicken coop area, to start adding bulk organic material to their pen. And that's going to basically help break down, and basically doing what I'm doing at my homestead is we're adding that organic material. They're going to scratch through it, scratching their manure, scratching their food, and it's slowly going to become a kind of starter for a compost pile. Another thing we do with this grass is actually use it in their nest boxes. So I just kind of cut it up into, 1 foot-ish sections, and I throw it in there, and they make a nice little comfy nest in there. They really appreciate new grass on a regular basis, and I'm sure you can find plenty of that on your property for your own nest boxes instead of having to buy hay or straw or something like that for it. If you don't want to build a compost pile and you just want to kind of get started, you can also just use this kind of system where you just keep on adding bedding, lots of organic material in there. They're going to scratch through it, and by the time you actually move them away, they've probably processed that material enough to actually then just prep a garden bed and start planting. So that's another strategy. You can just leave the chickens in there for a while, then prep your garden beds, add a little bit of compost, and get going. It's kind of a quicker turnaround in that way, instead of waiting for the compost to be ready. It just takes management. It just takes understanding how the system works, knowing when to move the chickens, knowing when to add more organic material. And that's why I'm showing you guys all this, so you can kind of understand when you need to do that and why you need to do that. Protect the soil always. If you see bare soil, then it's time to add organic matter. That's like a great rule of thumb that will pretty much always apply. But after taking this to the chickens, both of our chicken systems actually, we added organic material to. We also took it down to one of our beds within the forest. So these beds are going to be long-term storage crop beds. So this will be like our ginger, turmeric, maybe sweet potato, tubers of some sort. It's in the forest, has a little bit of more protection, and it's kind of further away from the house. So we want to do something that's more longer term. So we don't necessarily have to check on it every day. We can just check on it whenever, we're walking down that way and make sure it's okay. Because, turmeric, ginger, sweet potato, those things are all like 6 to 8 month crops, so it takes a while for them to actually be ready. So as long as they're established and we have a healthy soil there and they're getting enough water, then they should pretty much take care of themselves until it's time to harvest, which that's the goal down there in those forest systems, because we won't necessarily get to the forest all the time. So that goes into the permaculture idea of zoning. And I'll try to cover that zone and sector information in a couple other videos. I think that'll be a good topic for us to talk about. But zoning is essentially planning out your landscape based on how frequently you use each part of your landscape. So right outside your kitchen, your kind of home garden area, maybe your herb garden, that'll be zone 1, an area you're going to go every day, multiple times a day, right? Zone 2 is probably on the edge of that kind of zone 1 area. So zone 2 is where you're going to go probably daily still, but maybe not multiple times a day, or maybe you'll go twice a day. Maybe it's the chickens there, wherever you have your chickens. So you want to go check on them in the morning, make sure they're all right, make sure they have food, and then maybe you go and check on them in the evening just to make sure they're all closed up if you have to close up your coop wherever you are because of predator pressure. Here we don't have to worry about that too much. We just leave the coops open because we don't really have major predator pressure, which is great. It just makes managing chickens so much easier. But if you are in a climate where you do have predators, you just have to set up an electric fence system and then just have a coop that you can close up, and you can actually make it so that your coop automatically closes. There's a lot of videos out there on setting up automated coop door closing, so check that out. It's pretty fun one. But yeah, that's the zoning. So zone 2 would probably be, maybe where your chickens are if you're having chickens. On my homestead, that's kind of what I would consider my zone 2, along that kind of far side where the chickens are. But here our zone 2 is kind of essentially wherever we're having our chickens, and maybe like towards the end of our home garden and just into the forest there. And that's kind of where we're going to be putting those kind of more longer term crops, or we'll check on them on a regular basis, but maybe not every day. Maybe it's a zone 3 even, which is a little bit further out, and maybe you visit zone 3, 3, maybe 5 times a week, maybe even just like twice a week, or even 3 to 5 times a month. It's your visits are less occasional, less regular, so you want to make sure you have something there that doesn't need as much attention. Your lettuces, for example, especially here in the tropics, you're going to want those in zone 1 so you can make sure they're not frying. Your gingers and sweet potatoes, stuff that can kind of take care of itself for a while, that can go further away from your property. Should probably still be on your property, but it can go further away from your house, a little further away from where you won't see it every day, but it'll still be okay. All right, guys, that's pretty much the vlog today. It's kind of like just toss things together, a little kind of chop suey, whatever we have, we're throwing it all together, and I'm showing you what's going on. So I'm up here and just working today, so I figured I'd show you what we're working on, why we're making the choices we're making, the kind of design thinking behind it, and some options you can be using for the various resources on your property. In our case, we're talking about grass, how we're using the grass in various ways, as bedding, as mulch, as compost starts, as just chop and drop, adding to the soil right where we got it, and also just to help kind of cycle those nutrients within your property. I hope you've enjoyed. If you did like what you've seen, please like and subscribe to the channel. That's the best thing you can do to help me, and I would really appreciate any kind of help I can get with that. The more subscriptions I get, the more potential I have to reach more people, and also just kind of fun things I get to do. Obviously, it's a long way away, but when I get to 1,000 subscribers, I can go live, so I can actually walk around here live, and you guys can ask me things as I'm walking around properties. So that's a long way off. That's maybe a couple years away, but you never know. If we get this to go viral, maybe it'll go much faster, But yeah, let's hope you guys enjoyed today and enjoyed this vlog, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.